Survivalists versus homesteaders. Who would actually make it in an SHTF scenario? Welcome to Watching the Horizon. I'm Jake. So the question has come up, in an SHTF scenario, who would survive? Well, that's going to depend on a couple of things. In my opinion, I think that survivalism and homesteading are really just two different stops off of the same road. For the most part, they share many of the same skills and personality traits and qualities. I think a key factor here is your starting point. Physically, literally, where are you starting from? If you're in the middle of a city versus are you starting from out in the country? Then you have to consider, well, what is the scenario that we're talking about here? Is it a financial collapse? Is it a EMP? Is it something that slowly creeps up? Or is it some sort of instant devastating type of event that affects everybody all at the same time? I think these things matter to a degree. Because if you're a survivalist and you're starting in the middle of the city, then you've kind of got a long road ahead of you. The skills of a survivalist, essentially being able to live and survive off of the land and your environment, well, how adept are you at urban survival? Because if you're in the middle of a great big city with no power, for example, no means of communication or travel, just getting out of the city is going to be a pretty big adventure in and of itself. And once you do make it out of the city, you and everybody else is going to be out there too. And maybe some of them will be more skilled than you, most of them probably not. But we're still talking about competition. We're still talking about warm bodies out there, probably armed, all competing for the same resources. Going to be scared. Not going to really know what's going on. Going to probably be a lot of shooting going on, sort of a Hunger Games scenario, if you will. I think statistically, your chances are lower, even if you're the most skilled shooter and the most skilled survivalist. Just the fact that you have that many more people that you have to deal with before you get out there far enough to where you're essentially alone and on your own, I think just statistically, you're more likely to get hurt or dead. Now, if you're already starting out in the country and you claim to be a survivalist, well, you kind of already started. You can just walk out your back door into the woods and be lost and forgotten and kind of do your thing. There's a YouTube channel. You probably have seen it, Primitive Technology. Man, there's something cathartic about watching that guy build stuff essentially out of nothing. Yeah. I think it's totally possible. You could go out there, build yourself a mud hut, build yourself, some clay pots and river and fish and hunt, and as long as you were out there far enough to where competition wasn't something that you were going to have to worry about a whole lot, I think that a survivalist most definitely has a chance. But again, if competition becomes a problem, just the sheer numbers, you're working close to or in a city, then I would say your odds are pretty low. Now, a homesteader. Obviously, you can be a homesteader and be close to a city or out in the middle of the country. But like a survivalist, a homesteader is going to have a lot of the same skills. They're going to need to know a lot about the local plant life, the local animal life, what's dangerous, what can be food. They're going to be familiar with their environment. The main difference, I think, is going to be just simply that they're not as mobile. A survivalist might always be on the move. They might have a route planned out where they could trek 10, 20, 50, hundreds of miles in the wilderness, kind of avoiding populated areas and kind of taking opportunities where they see it. Whereas a homesteader is, well, they're sort of in one place. They might have a large piece of property, but for the most part, that's where they are. Now, again, depending on how close you are to a city or a large population center, I think is going to be a determining factor here. So if If you're the kind of homesteader that is highly mechanized, but it's an EMP, well, you're going to have some problems. But if you're a little bit more of a, backwoods country homesteader kind of thing where, yeah, you've got power tools and tractors and stuff, but for the most part, you know how to do the old things, the old ways. You're familiar with how to hunt and, that kind of thing. I think that the further away you are from a population center, again, depending on what the SHTF scenario is, I think you're kind of already ahead of the curve as long as, again, it's going to come down to competition. Now, a homesteader is going to have something that I believe a survivalist is never going to have, because survivalists, sort of by their very nature, are this lone wolf mentality. And I actually have another video about what I believe lone wolves will end up doing in an SHTF scenario. I'll link to that here. I think when it comes to long term, a survivalist probably isn't going to do that well. I think eventually a survivalist will have to join a group or essentially morph into a homesteader. I think survivalism and the whole survivalist movement thing, I think that is definitely a short-term solution to some sort of SHTF scenario, like a bug-out exit strategy, but it's not the long-term answer. So if we're talking about where something rolls across your city, maybe let's go pandemic, for example. Let's say there's a pandemic and it rolls through the city and it lots of people get sick and flood the hospitals and whatever. Well, eventually that will die out and everything will be okay again. At that point, you'll be able to move back in and, re-up your resources, and that kind of thing. One of the main differences that a homesteader is going to have that a survivalist is not going to have really is going to be community. Most homesteaders aren't lone wolf homesteaders. Most homesteaders are very much familiar with their neighbors and their community. So in the event of some sort of SHTF scenario, I think that a lot of these homesteaders are going to band together and create makeshift survivalist type groups. And they're going to have to organize in order to watch each other's back, because security is going to be a big deal. Well, mostly from people like survivalists who are going to come in and be opportunists and maybe steal or be sort of a parasitic nature just to get resources. So what's going to happen is if you've got a homestead of say one family, well, one family's not going to be able to do all the things necessary. They can't do security and grow food and make their own clothes and all the other things necessary. They're going to band together. They're going to have a system sort of set up where they rotate, and it'll definitely be a homestead community scenario versus your single survivalist out on their own. Again, survivalists versus homesteaders. Who would win in an SHTF scenario? Well, in short, I think they both have an honest chance depending on competition as far as where you're starting out at, like if you're in or near a large city versus the country. Really kind of regardless of the scenario, the further out you are in the country, the better off you are, whether it be, EMP or some sort of civil unrest, pandemic, financial collapse. All of these things are going to hit your urban centers much more hard than they will out in the country. When you have already set up a means to feed yourself, then that's one less thing you're going to have to worry about. If food and water and shelter are already established and in place, and if government systems go offline, like, the water gets shut off or the gas gets shut off, they already have, a year's worth of wood saved up and cut and ready to go. So they're not going to freeze to death. Homesteaders are not. Survivalists, well, they're going to be scrambling, really, for the most part. And that's, I think, part of the romanticism behind, survivalists is grabbing your backpack and hucking off into the woods and making do with what you got. And that's great. But that sort of seems like a whole lot of work, a lot of scrambling at the last moment, and the odds, I feel like, in that scenario are against you. So I would tip my hand more towards the Homesteader as far as any scenario is concerned, but I think they both have an honest shot, again, depending on a couple of things. But tell me what you think. Am I way off? Did I completely miss an entire subject there? But that's kind of where I'm leaning, is the homesteading. So if you can, get out of the city now. Go be that homesteader. If you can't be that homesteader, if you can't be that survivalist, maybe you don't have those skills, then do what you can. Get some food storage. Get some water storage. Get medical supplies and put them away. Even if you're in an apartment, get some stuff together, because the reality is anything's better than nothing. But food and water and medical supplies, basic hygiene type stuff, that's going to go a really long way. That's going to be more than worth its weight in gold in any SHTF scenario. So that's what I would recommend if you're watching this video and you're not either one, a survivalist or a homesteader. Well, start looking at buying some food. Get yourself extra food for your pantry, or get yourself some dried stuff. It doesn't matter. Just be even a little bit prepared, because I think you'll find it's going to go a long way. Anyway, I appreciate you watching. And like I said, put your ideas down in the comments below as far as which one you think would actually make it in an SHTF scenario. And happy 2018, guys. Thanks for watching, and be sure to keep your eyes open.